Little Johnny catches his parents going at it. He yells in, "Hey, Dad, what are you doing?" His father says, "Son, I'm filling your mother's tank." Johnny says, "Oh, yeah? Well, you better get a model that gets better mileage. The postman filled her this morning." A man picks up the ringing phone and says with a sigh, "Hi, Mom. Yeah, it's been a rough day. Gladys has been, well, her usual self. I know. I should stand my ground more, but it's not that easy. You remember how she gets—" Pause. "Yes, I remember what you said before the wedding. You warned me. Said she'd turn my life upside down. That she was stubborn, dramatic, and would drive me crazy. You were right, Mom. You were absolutely right." He listens for a second, then nods. "You want to talk to her?" He lowers the phone, turns toward the living room, and calls out, "Gladys, your mother wants to talk to you." A woman doesn't come home one night. The next day, she tells her husband that she had slept over at a girlfriend's house. The husband calls his wife's 10 best friends. None of them know anything about it. A man doesn't come home one night. The next day, he tells his wife that he had slept over at a friend's house. The wife calls her husband's 10 best men friends. 8 of them confirm that he had slept over, and 2 claim that he was still there. A drunk walks up to a cop. There's this drunk walking down the street, and he walks up to this cop and says, "Man, somebody stole my car." The cop says, "Well, where was it?" And he says, "It was right on the end of this key." The cop says, "There's not much I can do for you, but why don't you go down to the precinct house and report it down there? They'll fill out all the proper forms for you." The guy says okay, and he starts to walk off, but the cop stops him and says, "Before you go downtown, you better zip up your fly." The guy looks down and he says, "Aw, man, they got my girl too." At a local weight loss support group, Margaret stood up with a sheepish grin. "I had a moment this weekend," she confessed. "I baked my family's favorite chocolate cake. After dinner, they ate exactly half of it. I was proud of myself for only having a small sliver." She paused. "But then the next morning, that remaining half started talking to me, whispering from the kitchen like some sweet frosted siren." The group laughed. "I told myself, just one tiny slice for closure. But you know how it goes. One slice became another, and before I knew it, poof, gone. Every crumb." A woman in the back gasped, "Oh no, what did your husband say?" Margaret shrugged with a mischievous smile. "He never found out. I baked a second cake, ate half of that, and left it on the counter like nothing ever happened." A quiet, soft-spoken priest was getting ready to officiate a wedding at a small chapel. He greeted the guests with a nervous smile and barely said a word. Everyone assumed the ceremony would be short and simple. But as the couple approached the altar, the priest suddenly transformed. He delivered a heartfelt, hilarious, and perfectly timed speech, full of personality, charm, and laughter. The crowd was stunned and impressed. After the ceremony, the priest quickly returned to his quiet self, barely making eye contact or small talk. The groom walked over and said, "Father, that speech was amazing. But now you're so quiet again. What happened?" The priest smiled shyly and whispered, "Oh, that was just my alter ego." Little Johnny was out delivering newspapers when he knocked on a door. A woman answered, and Johnny said, "Hi, ma'am, I'm collecting. It's $5 for the paper." She sighed and said, "I'm a little short on cash right now, but I could give you some really great sex instead." Johnny paused, thought for a second, and said, "All right, then." He stepped inside. The woman led him to the bedroom, undid his pants, and pulled them down, only to be shocked at what she saw. It was the biggest penis she had ever laid eyes on. Johnny, without saying a word, reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a small handful of metal washers, and began sliding them one by one down his shaft. The woman, still staring, said breathlessly, You don't have to do that. I can take all of it. Johnny looked her dead in the eye and said, Not for $5 you can't. One afternoon, a husband looks at his wife and blurts out, Wow, your backside is starting to look bigger than the BBQ grill. Later that night, he tries to get a little cozy in bed. His wife rolls over and says, Oh no, sweetie. You really think I'm gonna fire up this deluxe grill just for one tiny sausage? Teacher asks the children to discuss what their dads do for a living. Little Mary says, My dad is a lawyer. He puts the bad guys in jail. Little Jack says, My dad is a doctor. He makes all the sick people better. All the kids in the class had their turn except little Johnny. Teacher says, Johnny, what does your dad do? Johnny says, My dad is dead. I'm sorry to hear that, but what did he do before he died? He turned blue and shall on the carpet. Teacher asks the children to discuss what their dads do for a living. Little Mary says, My dad is a lawyer. He puts the bad guys in jail. Little Jack says, My dad is a doctor. He makes all the sick people better. All the kids in the class had their turn except little Johnny. Teacher says, Johnny, what does your dad do? Johnny says, My dad is dead. I'm sorry to hear that, but what did he do before he died? He turned blue and shall on the carpet. A man planning a vacation wrote a letter to a small hotel in a Midwest town. He wrote, I'd love to bring my dog along. He's well-groomed, well-behaved, and won't be any trouble. Would you allow me to keep him in my room at night? The hotel owner replied immediately, I've been running this hotel for many years. In all that time, I've never had a dog steal towels, bed sheets, or silverware. I've never had to kick a dog out for being drunk and disorderly. And I've never had a dog run out on a hotel bill. Your dog is more than welcome at my hotel, and if he can vouch for you, you're welcome to stay too. A woman was livid. Her husband was late again. Fuming, she scribbled a note and left it on the nightstand. I've had enough. I'm leaving you. Don't try to find me. Then she quietly slid under the bed, determined to see his reaction when he got home. Minutes later, he walked in. She heard him pause. He picked up the note. Silence. Then the sound of a pen scribbling something. Suddenly, he made a call. She finally left. Yeah, for real this time. I'll be there in 10. Wear that little red thing I love. Tonight's gonna be wild. He hung up, grabbed his keys, and left. Heart pounding, eyes burning with tears, she crawled out from under the bed and snatched the note to see what he wrote. It said, I saw your legs. Just grabbing milk. Be right back. Grandma and Grandpa were rocking side by side on their front porch, watching as the setting sun painted the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. The air was calm, and they sat in peaceful silence, lost in fond memories of the good old days. After a while, Grandma looked over at Grandpa with a sparkle in her eye. Honey, she said sweetly, do you remember when we first started dating? You used to hold my hand so gently. Grandpa smiled, his weathered face lighting up. Without saying a word, he reached over and took her hand, their fingers fitting together like they always had. Encouraged, Grandma went on with a mischievous grin. And remember how, after we got engaged, you'd lean in and kiss me on the cheek for no reason at all? With a soft chuckle, Grandpa leaned over and placed a tender kiss on her cheek, making Grandma giggle like a girl again. Feeling bold, she added, And after we got married, remember how you used to nibble on my ear? At that, Grandpa paused, stopped rocking, and slowly stood up from his chair. Surprised, Grandma called out, Where are you going? Without missing a beat, Grandpa turned and said over his shoulder, To get my teeth! On a flight from Switzerland, a well-dressed, elegant woman found herself seated next to a kind-looking priest. He had a calm presence and a gentle smile, someone you'd instantly trust. After some polite conversation, she leaned in and whispered, Father, may I ask you a favor? Of course, my child, he replied warmly. What do you need? Well, She hesitated, glancing around. I just bought this very expensive high-tech hair removal device, but it's over my customs allowance, and I'm afraid they'll confiscate it. Would you be willing to hide it under your robe? The priest paused thoughtfully. I'll help you, but just know I cannot tell a lie. She smiled, relieved. That's fine. You're so trustworthy I doubt anyone would even question you. He nodded, tucked the device carefully beneath his robe, and they continued the flight without incident. When they landed, the priest stepped up to the customs counter. The officer gave him a quick once-over and asked, Do you have anything to declare, Father? The priest answered calmly, From the top of my head to my sash, I have nothing to declare. The officer raised an eyebrow. And from your sash down? The priest smiled and replied, From my sash down I carry a marvelous little device designed for use by women, but I assure you it has never been used. The customs officer froze, stared for a beat, and then broke into uncontrollable laughter. Move along, Father, he said, still chuckling. Next. Son. Mom, all the kids in the school are making fun of me because I am still a virgin. Mother. Well, start giving them bad grades and they will stop. An elderly Florida lady did her shopping and, upon returning to her car, found 4 males in the act of leaving with her vehicle. She dropped her shopping bags and drew her handgun, proceeding to scream at the top of her lungs, I have a gun, and I know how to use it! Get out of the car! The 4 men didn't wait for a second threat. They got out and ran like mad. The lady, somewhat shaken, then proceeded to load her shopping bags into the back of the car and got into the driver's seat. She was so shaken that she could not get her key into the ignition. She tried, and then she realized why. It was for the same reason she had wondered why there was a football, a frisbee, and 2 12-packs of beer in the front seat. A few minutes later, she found her own car parked 4 or 5 spaces farther down. She loaded her bags into the car and drove to the police station to report her mistake. The sergeant to whom she told the story couldn't stop laughing. He pointed to the other end of the counter, where 4 pale men were reporting a carjacking by a mad, elderly woman described as white, less than 5 feet tall, glasses, curly white hair, and carrying a large handgun. No charges were filed. During a particularly cheeky lesson, the teacher scanned the room and said, If there are any idiots here, would you please stand up? The classroom fell completely silent, until one freshman slowly stood up. Surprised, the teacher asked, You think you're an idiot? The student just shrugged and replied, Not really. I just didn't want you to be standing all alone. Later, during a psychology lecture on mental health, the teacher asked, How would you diagnose someone who paces nervously, shouts 1 minute, then bursts into tears the next? A voice from the back called out, Sounds like our basketball coach on game day. In earth science, while explaining map coordinates, the teacher said, If I told you to meet me at 23 degrees, 4 minutes north, and 45 degrees, 15 minutes east for lunch, where would that be? After an awkward pause, a student muttered, Probably having lunch alone. During physics class, the teacher explained, Isaac Newton discovered gravity when an apple fell on his head under a tree. Isn't that amazing? One student nodded and said, Yeah, but if he'd been stuck in a classroom like ours, he probably wouldn't have discovered anything. Finally, the teacher asked, Joseph, why were you late today? Joseph answered, There was a sign on the road. Curious, the teacher asked, What did the sign say? Joseph replied, It said, School ahead, go slow. So I did. A woman was invited to dinner at her boyfriend's parents' house for the first time. She was terrified. Nervous doesn't even begin to cover it. They sat down to a beautiful home-cooked meal, but between the nerves and the broccoli casserole, her stomach was not on board with the evening. About halfway through the meal, she felt a pressure building. and quietly let out a small, polite pfft. It wasn't loud, but it was definitely noticeable. Before she could die of embarrassment, her boyfriend's dad looked down at the dog lying under the table and said firmly, "Rusty, knock it off." She could barely believe her luck. She gave Rusty a grateful glance. A few minutes later, the pressure was back. This time, she let out a longer, louder one. "Rusty!" the father barked again. "I swear, if you don't quit!" Now she was getting confident. Maybe even a little too confident. A third round hit her, this one massive. No hesitation. She let it rip like a freight train pulling into the station. The dad slammed his fork down and shouted, "Rusty, for the love of all that's holy, move away from her before she blows you to the next zip code." A happily married couple had only one major issue in their relationship: the husband's morning routine of farting like a foghorn. Every day his wife would wake up to the thunderous blasts, gasping for air as the noxious fumes made her eyes water. "Please, for the love of all things holy, stop," she begged him daily. "I can't help it," he'd say. "It's totally natural." She warned him, "One day, you're going to blow your guts out." The years rolled by, and so did his morning explosions. Then came Christmas morning. As the wife was preparing the turkey, she stared at the pile of innards, gizzard, liver, neck, and all, and a brilliantly wicked idea struck her. She crept upstairs where her husband was still snoozing, gently pulled back the covers, and ever so carefully tipped the entire bowl of turkey guts into his underwear before tucking him back in. A while later, the house shook with his usual morning eruption, only this time, it was followed by a blood-curdling scream. The sound of frantic footsteps pounded toward the bathroom. The wife collapsed on the floor, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. 20 minutes later, the husband emerged, pale as a ghost in his now blood-streaked underwear. His face was a mask of horror. Trying to keep a straight face, his wife asked, "What happened?" He gulped. "Honey, you were right. All these years you warned me, but I never listened." "What do you mean?" she asked, barely holding it together. "Well, it finally happened. I farted my guts out." He shuddered, then added, "But by the grace of God, some Vaseline and 2 fingers, I think I got most of them back in." A man was pulled over for speeding. As the officer approached his car, the man immediately asked, "Officer, may I step out of the vehicle?" The officer nodded and gave his permission. Once outside, the officer asked, "All right, can you explain why you were speeding?" The man sighed deeply and pointed inside the car. "See the woman in the passenger seat? That's my wife. And the woman in the back seat, that's my mother-in-law. She's been living with us for the past 3 months. The officer raised an eyebrow, intrigued as the man went on. "This morning, my wife and mother-in-law had a huge fight. My mother-in-law declared she was done with us and insisted I take her back to her own home, so I'm just trying to get her there as fast as I can before they make up, because if they do, she'll want to come back with us." The officer paused for a moment, then chuckled and said, "All right, get back in your car. I'm going to give you a police escort, lights and sirens included, to make sure she gets home safely." Ma was in the kitchen peeling potatoes when she called out the window, "Earl, that outhouse is acting up again." Earl, sitting on the porch rocking and whittling a stick, didn't even look up. "There ain't nothing wrong with that outhouse. I used it just fine this morning." Ma fired back, "Well, somebody sure didn't. Go check it before someone falls through." With a heavy sigh and a muttered, "Lord, give me strength," Earl grabbed his lantern and shuffled toward the outhouse. A minute later, his voice echoed from the yard. "I don't see a darn thing wrong, Ma." Ma called back, "You gotta look real close." Earl paused. "How close are we talking?" "Stick your head in and shine that light." Mumbling about surviving 40 years of marriage and 2 busted hips, Earl leaned inside. Suddenly, "Yeah! Ma, My mustache is stuck in the seat crack. Back in the kitchen, Ma dropped her potato and doubled over laughing. Well, Earl, she managed through her giggles, next time just fix the darn thing when I ask, and your face won't end up where your behind usually goes. A Mexican man who didn't speak any English walked into a department store, hoping to buy a pair of socks. He made his way to the men's section, where a friendly saleswoman approached. Quiero calcetines, he said politely. She smiled, puzzled. Sorry, I don't speak Spanish, but take a look at our latest suits. No quiero trajes, quiero calcetines, he said again, pointing to his feet. Oh, maybe you'd like a nice shirt. They're on sale. No camisas. Calcetines, he insisted, growing more desperate. Well, how about pants? Right this way. No pantalones. Calcetines, he said, now clearly frustrated. She gestured toward sweaters. These just came in. No sweater. Calcetines. Trying one more time, she pointed to undershirts. Maybe one of these? The man shook his head. No camisetas. Solo calcetines. Suddenly he spotted the sock display and lit up with joy. He grabbed a pair, held them up, and said proudly, Eso sí que es. The saleswoman's eyes widened. Well, why didn't you spell it out from the beginning? Two priests decided to take a much-needed break from their parish duties and booked a tropical getaway to sunny Hawaii. But before the plane even took off, they made a pact. No collars, no black clothes. We're going full tourist mode. Once they landed, they hit a beach shop and loaded up on colorful shirts, floral shorts, flip-flops, straw hats, and sunglasses the size of dinner plates. They looked more like cruise ship mascots than clergymen. The next morning, they strolled along the beach, sipping fruit smoothies and enjoying the sun, completely relaxed and totally incognito. Then suddenly, a stunning blonde in a bikini walked by, flashed a smile, and said, Good morning, Father. Good morning, Father. They nearly dropped their drinks. How on earth did she know? Determined not to be recognized again, they returned to the shops that afternoon and cranked up the disguise. Neon tank tops, goofy socks with sandals, seashell necklaces, and hats that said, Aloha, dude. They looked ridiculous and completely unpriest-like. The next day, back on the beach, they strutted confidently, sure their cover was solid, but wouldn't you know it, the same blonde passed by, waved, and said with a grin, Good morning again, fathers. One of them stood up and said, All right, we give up. How did you know we were priests? She chuckled, took off her sunglasses, and said, It's me, Sister Mary from the convent. You two are terrible at hiding.